Good day, Thomas Jefferson Hour podcast listeners. As always, thank you so much for listening. And as always, thank you for supporting the show if you've chosen to do so. We really appreciate it. We really, really do appreciate it. Go to jeffersonhour.com, click on donate, and you can find out the options. And this week, three of our old friends, it was your idea, Clay. You said, it's been a long time since we've talked to Pat and Beau and Brad or Crisler, as you say. And so we talked to all three of them, and it was just delightful.
I love these people. Pat is one of the most lovely and life-affirming people that I've ever met in my life. She's been exceedingly good to us. She's sent seeds. She's welcomed in her former role as the head gardener at Monticello, friends of the Jefferson Hour. They come and mention the show, and she shows them around the gardens. And if the moment is right, they get to plant a bit of lettuce or to help cut back some vine or other. She represents the Jeffersonian, in my opinion, at a time when Monticello is in some ways less Jeffersonian than it has ever been. So that's really very important. And Beau Wright is that kind of golden youth who believes in public service, who had, as a child almost, worked for the Obama administration, who believes in the progressive agenda but is exceedingly reasonable and never doctrinaire. And so he always brings a high level of good sense and I think an insider's understanding of what goes on in Washington to bear on the show. And then Crisler, he's a modest man, but he is something of a Renaissance man. His interests are varied. He's just whip smart.
A songwriter philosopher.
He is that, but he also is a traveler, and he's gotten involved in aesthetics. He paints, and he sent you a painting which is really extraordinary. He's really something, and so we check in with David Nicandri on questions of the Enlightenment. But what I was really struck by most today was the sense in which the Jefferson Hour has built a kind of community. That these are people who listen to the program. They have things to say. They bring a different perspective from the one that I bear and the one that you bear. For example, Pat Brodowski talking about Joshua Fry. In every biography of Jefferson, in the first 20 pages, you read about his father's partnership with Joshua Fry as they surveyed the western parts of Virginia, built the map of Virginia that was the best map of its time, and examined the boundary between Virginia and North Carolina. And that's it. Then that's it for Joshua Fry. And you never hear about him again because he's a bit player in the story of one of America's greatest individuals, Jefferson. But he deserves more than that. And here he was related to this place, the inn at Meander in Orange County, Virginia. And so everybody who is a correspondent brings something to the program that we don't otherwise have. And then you have our heavyweights, Linda Chervinsky and Joseph Ellis, who have really, I think, deepened the discourse and become favorites of our audience. And so this is a golden time for the Jefferson Hour, and I know you feel it as much as I do. And Thanksgiving is about gratitude. Well, it's actually about two things. It's about abundance, and my goodness, is there American abundance, and gratitude. This was instituted over different periods of time in different ways, but finally kind of gelling during the Civil War as the day every year during the harvest or at the end of the harvest when we step back and say, we are so blessed. We are so blessed with abundance and access to the fruits of life. I'm reading A Tale of Two Cities by Dickens, and he talks realistically about the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of people in France in 1785 who were starving to death. I mean, literally starving to death or deeply malnourished, their children's growth stunted, their children dying of diseases that we routinely live through today. And what's the difference? We have created a system which has produced unprecedented abundance. And so if you're an American, no matter what your social standing or economic status, and you don't feel something of the incredible abundance that is America, I think you're sort of missing the mark. And I think this is a good time, given the rancor that is percolating in American national political circles, for us to step back and just say, God bless this country. God bless what we have here.
Very good, sir. And thank you all for listening. With that, let's go to the show. Good day, citizens, and welcome to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation with or about President Thomas Jefferson. This week, we're going to have a conversation with some friends of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. I'm your host, David Swenson, joined by the creator of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, Mr. Clay Jenkinson, and also joined by Mr. Beau Wright, who we have not talked to in quite a while. Beau is a third-generation Lynchburg native and eighth-generation Central Virginian. He currently serves as the Director of Operations for Protect Democracy. And prior to this, from 2011 to 2017, he served in numerous capacities in the White House under President Obama, including the Senior Deputy Director of Operations and Director for Finance. Do I have all that about correct, Beau?
Yeah, it's very generous of you to read my resume. That sounds about right.
And currently, you are Vice Mayor of Lynchburg.
That's accurate. I'm Vice Mayor for the city of Lynchburg until December 31st, 2022.
Well, welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. We haven't talked to you in quite a while, and we're recording this the week of Thanksgiving, and Clay suggested, and I agreed, it was time we caught up with some of our friends. So we're starting with you. What's new in Lynchburg and Thanksgiving week in Lynchburg?
Well, it's so good to talk with both of you. It's been a long time, but as an avid Thomas Jefferson Hour listener, I just want to thank you and congratulate you on a string of just really wonderful shows over the past several months. So thank you. And I'm doing well. Lynchburg is doing well. We've had a really beautiful autumn here in Central Virginia. It's sort of in full swing. We had colors this year that were really dramatic and some of the best we've had in recent years. And so now we're gearing up for Thanksgiving and the holidays. And I, for one, am really excited about Christmas. I have three siblings, and they all have families. And so they're all going to be coming home to Lynchburg for Christmas. So that's exciting, and I'm looking forward to it.
Beau, the last time we talked with you was on the other side of about $5 trillion worth of federal spending. When you reflect on that we're now spending money with trillions as the baseline, and that this whole Democratic agenda, which looks as if it's going to make its way successfully through Congress, is effectively an omnibus bill that calls itself Build Back Better or an infrastructure bill. I feel certain that Thomas Jefferson would be deeply alarmed, first at the staggering amount of money that's being contemplated here, but perhaps even more by the fact that a bill like this becomes a grab bag for a vast number of different initiatives and projects that wind up passing under the aegis of a single omnibus bill. What do you make of all this?
Well, you raise an interesting point about process, and I'm not a legislative scholar, so I'd defer to others to sort of speak about the most appropriate way for the majority in Congress to pursue their agenda. But I think it's if we sort of step back, it's pretty clear that a lot of Americans feel that the country is not on the right track, that income levels have not risen in proportion to what seems to be national prosperity. And so I think that this is an attempt to right-size the ship, to make sure that more Americans, our working class and middle class Americans, are really at the forefront of what the federal government is trying to do by making, I think, now historic investments in infrastructure.
I hear you. But I live in a red state, and I try to be very much attuned to red state concerns. And you say there's a felt need to address the wild inequality of wealth and access to the fruits of life that has been growing over the past few decades. And I certainly agree with you. I think the problem of the few and the many is probably more acute now than it was during the Gilded Age. It may be more acute now than it has ever been in American history. But on the other side, I hear conservatives and Republicans and red state people being extremely discontented with what they take to be the trajectory of the country, because they want to be able to address these questions piecemeal. They might agree with 20% or 40% or even 70% of what's in this omnibus bill, but there are things that they find questionable or even offensive to them. And so this doesn't exactly build a national new consensus. It may, in the end, 10, 15 years from now, make America a much better country because we will have addressed some issues that have been sleeping for a long time. But if this doesn't bring on anything like bipartisan support or consensus, doesn't it have the danger of continuing to divide the country in this kind of alarming way?
I read a pretty alarming statistic this week, which is that the middle 60% of the country now has less wealth than the top 1%, which is a pretty staggering statistic, which means, I think, then that a lot of people are being left out. And that's where a lot of the discontent in red states and blue states is originating from, I think, this feeling of being left behind. And I think I understand your point about piecemeal, but I think there's a legislative reality here, which is that most administrations have one or two bites at the apple to get stuff done, especially in this highly polarized day and age. There are lots of different political dynamics at play, and a president only has so much political capital to expend. And I think that that really is a finite resource for presidents, as President Biden's sort of approval ratings have shown. And so to do it piecemeal, I think, would be to sort of sacrifice achieving much of anything. And look, the incentive structure right now on Capitol Hill and in legislatures around the country is not to compromise.
Let's go back to your initial question, Clay, which was, how would Jefferson react to all of this? And what Beau is talking about is a real inequality of income. Jefferson witnessed that in France. In fact, you're the one who educated me about that. That inequality of the middle class, historically, that leads to the downfall of nations, doesn't it?
It can. What's amazing in American history, and I will be interested in Beau's response to this, is how we've been able to fend that off. In other words, the obscene inequality of access to wealth and opportunity and the fruits of life in America would have probably produced a social revolution or maybe an armed revolution in other countries. And so the perplexity is, why doesn't that happen here? And I think there are several reasons for that. I'll illuminate them really quickly. Number one, we're so wealthy. We're a nation of really vast, unprecedented wealth. The pie is big enough and keeps growing so that you can just dribble down enough to the masses and the middle class that they bite their tongue and accept it. The second reason is that in America, there has been an ethos from the beginning that I might just get fabulously rich. I might win the lottery. And the third reason is related to the first, which is that our resource base here, we have land, we have incredible mineral wealth. We have one of the greatest watersheds in the world, the Missouri-Mississippi River system, that produces stunningly productive agriculture. And so the resource base in America has always suggested possible opportunity. You can't find that opportunity in Italy. You can't find that opportunity in France because the land has been deeded out for millennia and there's nothing new to exploit. And so in America, we have been able to quiet discontent and even to buy off discontent in a way that I think is staggering, certainly to any Marxist, but also to any economic historian. What say you, Beau?
Well, actually, I was going to ask you a question, Clay, which is, I guess the last time we had such stark income inequality was during the Gilded Age.
Yes.
Which then in part led rise to the progressive movement. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes.
And do you see something similar to that, the sort of farther reaches of the Democratic Party now? Do you see that as a potential avenue to channel people's discontent?
Yes, I do, but I don't think it's going to work this time. First of all, we're fractured. Everybody has their own network, essentially. Here's what strikes me. After the Gilded Age, we produced populism, and in places like North Dakota, radical movements like the Nonpartisan League, the Socialist Party gained more votes in 1912 than it ever has before or since in the history of the country. The trade union movement was really a powerful and threatening force in the age of William McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt. And now fast forward to today. Today's, and I'm using air quotes here, populism is a strange kind of right-wing, give me back my America, don't let this country become a white minority country kind of populism. And it really isn't populism at all. It's some sort of a very low-level, quasi-fascist reaction to modernity. But I don't see at the moment that this new, much vaunted progressive era is coming. I think that the Democrats on the left really want it. And I do think that a new progressive era would be extremely good for the country.
Goodness, Beau, I called to have us wish each other a happy holiday season, and I've taken the two of you to the end of the Republic. I know that you have some important meetings to go to this morning, and I'm so grateful that you took a few minutes to talk to us, but I will give you the last word, sir.
Oh, you're very kind. Well, it's always refreshing to both listen to you all and then a great joy to speak with you. I wish you both, and of course all of the Thomas Jefferson Hour listeners, a very peaceful and meaningful Thanksgiving, and I hope that we can all approach our dining room tables with a measure of goodwill and hopefully a little less politics this Thanksgiving.
Beau, stay strong, stay healthy, and keep talking to us, will you?
Hey, you all do the same. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
We're going to take a short break, but we will return to talk to Pat Brodowski, the former head gardener at Monticello, in just a moment. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
Welcome back to this special edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. It's a holiday edition in which we're talking to some of our closest friends and correspondents from around the country. David Swenson, the semi-permanent guest host of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. We love to talk to Beau. A couple of things I want your reflections on. Number one, he wasn't buying the Jeffersonian critique of a giant omnibus bill of more than $2 trillion. He's a Democrat, of course, and he's an Obamaite and a progressive. And so his view is, we get one shot at this, we'd better take it, and we won't really worry too much about the niceties of the process. And secondly, I think he believes that addressing this fundamental question of income equality in the United States is so important that it's worth pressuring and distorting the traditional process in order to achieve something along those lines. What do you think?
Well, I go back to what I said, which is the thing that you taught me about, and then I delved into it farther, which was when Jefferson met this peasant woman in France and how affected he was by that. He wrote about it. It would be easy to just say, well, Jefferson would say no to all of this because that's his philosophy of government. But at the same time, he was so affected by this, and he would certainly recognize this out-of-control distribution of wealth in America today. And isn't that what government is for? Is to look out for all of us and put policies in place that ensure the future of the Republic?
Yes, of course. The only thing I can say to that is that Jefferson had a really naive view of this, that if you want a bridge across the Potomac you have a bill for a bridge across the Potomac. And then if you want a better school system in Norfolk, you have a bill for a better school system in Norfolk, and that each one is tied to a specific amount of money. People understand how it's tied to that project and no other. They vote on this as a discrete budget element. Jefferson wanted it to be that clean, tidy, a skinny bill on every subject so that you as a citizen could say, oh, wow, that new bridge across the Missouri here in Bismarck, North Dakota is going to cost $60 million. That means my taxes are going to go up by $800 for the next 3 years. I better really think about whether we need that new bridge. And when you create legislation the way both parties do now, but in this case particularly the Democrats in 2021, you throw so many things into this that A, you can't see all the things that are in it, and B, there's no way you can really make the cost analysis that taxpayers really need to be able to make to decide how they want to spend their hard-earned money. So I get it. This is now, that was then. Our politics are so distorted now that I do believe you take it while you can if you can get it. But I think it would be very unsettling for Jefferson. He would agree on the problem, but I don't think that he would agree on the process of addressing that problem.
Well, that we'll never know, obviously, but it's always an interesting discussion. And I come back to that movie line of, I always thought the world is what we make it. And I think government is what we make it, because we are the government. And thank goodness for that. Shall we talk to Pat?
Yes, let's change the subject from the political paralysis and the issues of our time and talk to our dear friend, the former chief gardener at Monticello, someone who has been extremely generous to both of us and taught us a good deal about agriculture and gardening.
A longtime friend of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. For many years, you were the head gardener at Monticello. You are recently retired. I got a text from you not too long ago about I think it was a tailgate contest at the Montpelier steeplechase, and you won. Can you fill us in on that?
It was marvelous. We have a team, and there's basically 3 of us that plan ahead, and then we invite about 25 closest friends, and we have a big potluck. And this year it was a British theme, and so we had foods that related to famous British people like Queen Victoria. We had an outdoor table seated for 20 people with flowers and linen napkins. We had a breakfast brunch table with a fountain of gold flowers and lots of fine drinks and little pastries. And we had a main meal with lots of pots over sterno of stews, and we had a pie. We had the haddock, the Finian, whatever that was, haddock soup recipe that Queen Victoria liked. We had a lot of Scottish and English dishes. So what happened is they have a chef or a cadre of chefs that come around and look at what you are putting on for your tailgate party during the races. And Janae Jenkins, it was one of the chefs who was the judge. And so she's next to me here, and we are at the inn at Meander, which apparently was frequented by Jefferson, not as an inn that back then. Our prize was to come here and stay at the inn. So then I went and said, hey, Janae, how about telling us some more about this inn? So that's how this came to be.
Well, wonderful. And you got to spend time at Montpelier, and now you're spending time at the inn. And Janae, welcome to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. I'm sure Clay has some questions for you.
Hello, thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Welcome, both of you, to the Jefferson Hour. We miss you, Pat. I'm glad to meet you, Janae. So, Pat, did you say John Evelyn, the 17th century British antiquarian?
Oh, yes. He wrote a huge, his plan was to write everything he knew about horticulture, everything available at horticulture in his life. Didn't quite get through it, but there was a supplement called Ascetaria, a discourse on salads. And he talks about making that chopped kale salad rubbed with olive oil and salt that is so popular today. And so I just love telling people this is actually from, 1659 or so.
That's fantastic. I've studied John Aubrey and John Evelyn. Evelyn was a great diarist. Among other things, he described the Great Fire of London in the 1660s. Have you ever, Pat, read Isaac Walton's The Complete Angler?
Oh, no, but that's on my list.
You must, because he is also prone to talk about salads, which really were a big deal in the 17th century, and then they kind of dropped out until quite recently. But he says one of the greatest things I've ever read. He's talking about strawberries. And Isaac Walton says, doubtless God could have made a better berry, but doubtless he never did.
And I think Jefferson probably felt the same way because he had, I think, 10 varieties of strawberries, and I've been trying to track them down now, and some of them have gone out of existence, and you have to like rebreed them. So it was one of my goals. That's why we ran around in California looking for the chili strawberry, but I had no luck growing it here in Virginia. It just doesn't like the climate.
I recall that bizarre quest we made on the Monterey Peninsula, looking for exactly what you had in mind and didn't quite achieve it. Tell me what's happened to the strawberry. When I buy them in the store, they're just a woody, awful thing that tastes more like a turnip than a strawberry.
Yeah, well, they pick them too green or whatever. So, I did meet some people up at Cornell who are breeding really fine strawberries that they can harvest in October and that are very, very sweet. So there's a lot of cultivation going on. Part of the strawberry thing is there's too much sprays applied. And so people are working hard to get a better strawberry for us, in modern day.
A couple of years ago, we did a program with a man who's trying to bring back the tomato. But not just the tomato, a commercially viable and transportable tomato, which is not as easy as you think. And it just struck me, and as does this conversation. Here we are, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, with access unprecedented in history to everything that life can afford. We can ship things from China to the U.S. We can ship things from South America, from Saudi Arabia. And why is it, Pat, that we American consumers are willing to eat bad tomatoes, bad strawberries, etc.?
Well, you've hit right on it. It's the shipping. If you have to be able to ship something and not have it bruise. And so if you want to have a perfectly ripe strawberry, you better go back out in your backyard and pick it, because you won't be able to transport that on a ship from China. It will have to be green, and then apply ethylene to it to ripen them up. And no, it's the demand of having things available every season of the year rather than seasonal and regional. And we really need to get back to the seasonal, regional focus.
You're a wonderful and I think understated exemplar of this movement to know your food, to know where it was produced, to bring it locally if possible, to prefer taste, to shelf life, to reduce or eliminate herbicides, fertilizers, and pesticides. And here's my question. I know this exists as a movement in the country, but it's still a relatively small thing. The average consumer at this moment is at a supermarket buying stuff, not knowing where it came from, or at Walmart or whatever. Do you see in your lifetime or your daughter's lifetime the U.S. getting more serious and this not being an interesting minority movement, but becoming a new way of seeing our food supply?
In my lifetime, I've seen a lot of change, and I bet you have too, because in my lifetime, we moved from having these hippie co-ops to farmers markets everywhere that are really nice. And the CSA movement is a community-supported agriculture where families sign up to have, their regional food available every week. It's really amazing, and the amount of organic produce, and even though some of that regulations and signage may be incorrect, at least it's much, much better than when I was a kid going to the grocery store. I grew up in a family that we grew most of our food. It wasn't a lot purchased. But today, I think more is available if you search for it, if you demand for it. And even Walmart has organic produce here and there. So
even Walmart. I want to pull us back to this award, this contest that you won, and this new friend of yours that you've brought along to converse with us. And so, Janae, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about the Jeffersonian connection at the inn at Meander?
I am the head chef here at Meander, and we have a bed and breakfast that has 11 guest rooms and a tavern open to both the public and our inn guests. We have tried to keep it as colonial and historical as possible, and you can tell that in the different architecture and bumps and bruises that the house does have, but yet the elegance and
The atmosphere.
yes, the atmosphere, and it has a lot of influential architectural pieces from Thomas Jefferson. The founder of the home was Colonel Joshua Fry, and his son was Henry Fry, and Thomas Jefferson was born when Henry Fry is 5 years old.
What I think is really interesting is Joshua Fry, who's Henry's dad, and Peter Jefferson, who is Thomas Jefferson's dad. They both worked together very closely for many years. They were really close friends, and they were doing surveying work together. And together they made that famous Fry-Jefferson map of Virginia. And so it's an old family friendship that developed from the dads to the sons. And so Jefferson would stop here at Henry's house, which is now the inn. I don't think it was an inn when they were friends.
No, it was not.
Yeah.
It was a private home, and it was called Elam at the time.
So Joshua Fry and Jefferson's father, Peter, spent a lot of time in the western part of Virginia, but they also mapped the dividing line between North Carolina.
What's really fascinating is this is in Orange County, Virginia, and the county was founded in 1734 when William IV of Orange marries Anna of Hanover. And that at that time, Orange County was founded, and it was to provide a means of saying the British own all of the land from here over to the Mississippi, which is huge. And then Joshua Fry and George Washington are sent out to Ohio to kind of establish a fort. And that's when Joshua Fry falls off his horse and has these incredible injuries. But George Washington is his associate, his lieutenant. And that's how come George Washington assumes control of the Virginia forces and actually, later becomes president. So some historians say, oh, Joshua Fry would have been our president. Isn't that fascinating?
Right.
Well, my ears perked up at was it William of Orange?
Yes.
Because I happen to be a descendant of William, Prince of Orange.
That's the same guy.
Would I be welcome at the inn then?
Oh, of course.
Oh, maybe
Noted.
a discount.
Yeah, red carpet.
David, how do we know this?
Know what?
That you're descendant from William, the Prince of Orange.
I have the papers. I'll show them to you.
He has the finesse, just obvious. And so legend has it that Anna was not much of a catch. And she was a little bit heavy and not, she wasn't a beauty. And so she's presented at court with William, and they said, will you marry William IV? And she said, I would marry him even if he were a baboon.
Well, the inn at Meander sounds like a fascinating place, and it's just north of Montpelier, right?
Yes, so we are 8 miles north of the town of Orange, Virginia, and we're on the border of Madison and Culpeper. And you can reach us at inn@meander.com. So INN @meander.com.
Excellent.
It would take Jefferson about 4 days from Monticello to Washington, and he would stay at Montpelier a lot. He'd go to Orange, and then from here he'd go north to, I think, in the Culpeper area. But he would pass by Henry's house, and there's a couple of letters in 1804 in which he's stopping by to drop off a book. They were talking about religious ideas together.
Speaking of Monticello, Pat, how long were you there, and how long have you been retired now?
I was there almost 12 years. It would have been 4 months short of 12 years. And so I retired at the 1st of January, and it's been great.
Well, you strike me as the kind of person who will always be busy with something. Listen, we called because it's Thanksgiving week as we're recording this. And before we say goodbye to you, do you have any holiday season wishes for our listeners?
Well, I hope everyone has a chance to come to a cozy inn like this one. It's just so heartwarming to be here next to the fire. It's just the perfect place to be for Thanksgiving. Kind of gives you that connection to the past. And, you remember all the people that have passed through here and, in friendship. It's really, and so I hope everyone has that sense of friendship and well-being during Thanksgiving.
So, Pat, we need your help. It was a drought here this year. I think David did better than I did, but we didn't have superlative gardens, and I had a relatively miserable garden. I know Jefferson wrote that famous letter about how one species compensates for the loss of another, and one year is better than the next. But give us some sense of optimism. This was a disheartening year for gardening.
I think in Maryland they had more than enough rain. All the gardens there that I helped with were really beautiful, and my own garden was pretty great. So someone will have, an abundance while someone else does not, and you can just send seeds to each other and, just start again. Jefferson would manure things. He really hoped that heavy fertilization would overcome, disasters.
So you have our address. Send seeds, send produce, send indigo, send wool, send yarn, send all the things that you do.
Are you weaving now?
No, but you do.
I'm teaching natural dye courses next year, 2 of them for the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival. And that's pretty fascinating. I've got some books from the 1800s to read.
I'll never forget when we were together heading towards the Outer Banks and you described to me the need for pans of urine to cure indigo or something.
You're correct. See, I taught you well.
That's all I remember.
Pat, thanks so much for coming in. Janae, really good to meet you. It sounds like you've got a dream job too.
Thank you. I really enjoy it. We have a beautiful place to be at, so thank you.
The Inn at Meander.
Happy holidays, guys. We're
going to take a short break, but we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
Welcome back to the special holiday edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. We're checking in with some of our favorite people around the country, correspondents who have been on the Jefferson Hour on a periodic basis over the last few years. And of course, we could not do that without checking in with Bradford Crisler of Nashville, Tennessee, songwriter, man about town, artist and art collector, aficionado of miniature paintings, and so much more. Hello, Crisler.
Hello, my friends. How are you?
For people who don't know who you are, Brad, because it has been a while since we've talked to you. You talked about how you pulled back and retired somewhat from the music industry, although I know that never completely happens. For people who don't know, you wrote a number of hits, Sweet Southern Comfort. That was the most performed song of 2007. You got an award for that. But then you moved into Truman B. Crisler Fine Portrait Miniatures. And you not only do miniatures, I am looking now at a wonderful portrait of John Adams, which I think you sent me for inspiration, and it worked. It worked.
Yeah, well, I could feel you leaning toward the Adamsite world, and
well, somebody on this show's got to do that,
Well, yeah, and thanks for reminding me, David, that I spent 30 years as a professional songwriter, producer. As you guys know, I'm from Alabama, from Muscle Shoals, and I just had a great career. But the thing we all love about Jefferson, and the reason I've always connected to Jefferson, he's a 5 on the Enneagram, which means he is what's known as the investigator. He is endlessly curious about the world around him, and it isn't just was never satisfied with being passively or nominally involved in the subject. He voraciously surrounded it and consumed it, and he was, as we know, a true Renaissance man in the American sense, and was able to hold conversations about so many different topics. That is something I try to model my life after. In fact, it comes intuitively. Those of us who are wired that way, just can't help be that way. And I feel like Jefferson was the perfect model for that, the perfect embodiment of the curious Enlightenment figure. That's why I love him. That has kind of been, something I've taken seriously in my life. And because of that, I was able to move into this, really quirky field of 18th century and early 19th century American portrait miniatures. And it has become, a passion of mine. Portraits and art and antiques in general, tend to get lost through the generations, their importance. And that's been a passion that's been both fun and lucrative, and I continue to be involved in that. I still do lots of music. Every single day I get up and walk into the studio and turn stuff on, and I'm just kind of amazed by the possibilities, the ability to make music that I don't owe anyone, that is not for another artist or a project, just music to be made simply for the purpose of getting better at it. And that's something I've kind of rediscovered in my retirement. And I love doing it. I create music every day.
You got to be careful about that word retirement. You're pretty young for that, Brad.
Well, it's retirement from commercial music business is what I am referring to. Obviously, I've hopefully many years to discover and become knowledgeable about other things I'm passionate about, and continue to study and be fascinated by the American Sphinx, Thomas Jefferson.
Well, there you go. How Jeffersonian are you? You're doing something you have a passion for with no consideration about whether or not there's a profit in it.
That's right.
I'm not buying this sort of struggling artist, but apropos of Jefferson as Renaissance man, Brad, I have a book in front of me called The Polymath, A Cultural History from Leonardo da Vinci to Susan Sontag. It's by Peter Burke, The Polymath. And in the index, Jefferson is in it in a big way, of course, but John Adams isn't in it, and George Washington isn't in it, and James Madison isn't in it, and James Monroe isn't in it, and Thomas Paine isn't in it, and they're all great people, but Jefferson is our polymath. Jefferson is America's great exemplar of lifelong curiosity, a thirst to know things in every possible direction, a belief that knowledge is valuable for its own sake. It doesn't have to be fungible. It doesn't have to have immediate application. In his last days, when he's dying in 1826, he's still reading Thucydides in the original Greek. That indefatigable curiosity is so important to our understanding of Jefferson. And I want to ask you a question pertaining to it. As you know, Jefferson is now so tightly locked into the problems of race, richly deserved the criticism of Jefferson, but he's so tightly now locked into current events and constitutional questions and the problem of race that at times we forget that he's America's Leonardo. And to do that is really to do a disservice to what he really represents, isn't it?
I believe that personally, and you guys know part of my passion for Jefferson and curiosity about him is his character, and the fact that he does have this paradoxical, problematic character. And I believe, maybe unlike you guys, that is a product of the failed part of the Enlightenment, the part that kind of allows this compartmentalization of kind of moral philosophy and kind of practical living and the rational man, and we're all autonomous, rational figures with no, kind of moral responsibility. I believe that is a flaw of kind of the Enlightenment that was embodied in Jefferson. That compartmentalization that allowed him to write the 35 words and yet never see, clear to free his slaves, and the many other kind of paradoxes that exist in his character. I believe that's important for us to study at length and very deeply, because it is our own character. And that has never been more clear than our present moment, that there are these paradoxes that exist that are almost exclusive and inherent to the American experience. And if we're ever going to get anywhere, I think we have to be honest about those flaws and paradoxes and compartmentalizations that have some very dangerous and negative in games. And I believe that not only should we not be jettisoning Jefferson from public discourse and observation, we should be enhancing it, because in doing so, we are understanding more clearly and deeply kind of the roots of some of the problems that we're having in our culture now. That's my take.
I couldn't agree more. That was brilliantly said. I think you nailed it. You know what I hear you saying, and tell me if I'm paraphrasing it correctly, that of course it's interesting and important to examine these questions of paradox and inconsistency and unresolved Enlightenment energies in Jefferson. But it's even more important that we realize that we are the legacy of that same paradoxical Enlightenment, and we have not yet fully worked out these inconsistencies in the American dream and in American ideals. And there's no way we're going to be able to duck this forever, although we've been pretty successful at it through the course of our history. But now more than ever, we need really to dig in and look at the founding generations and to try to tease out what they got right, what they were blind to, what they got wrong, what they got profoundly wrong, and not only to realize that we're the legacy and the children of that era, but that there's unresolved revolutionary business ahead.
That is exactly it, my friend. And I, like you, am no apologist for Jefferson. In fact, I'm troubled by that character, but no more troubled than I am my own character. And I think if we're ever going to understand ourselves and our unique place in the world, kind of as a nation and the DNA of the nation, we have to grapple with and understand, this paradoxical genius. Jefferson, with some other notable exceptions, Jack Kennedy and people who are other political figures, Jefferson to me is the perfect example of the best that we can be and the worst we can be in the same person. And that's what makes him so mysterious, but that's also what makes him so relevant.
Let me ask you one last question here, Brad, and I don't mean this to be irreverent at all, but I think my own view is that country music sort of expresses the zeitgeist, sort of expresses what's going on in the country more directly than pop music does, that somehow country music hones in on what's going on in much of America. So my question is this. I would expect now, thanks to the pandemic, that there will be a body of country Western music that is pandemic related, where there's talk about sheltering and talk about masks and talk about working from home and so on. Is that true?
Oh, my friend, how I wish it were. Unfortunately, commercial country music now has become kind of inseparable from American pop music. Part of it has been because of kind of this consolidation of music as a commodity, because of the internet, because of there are no more barriers to kind of distribution, just like there is in all publishing. One can make a record in their bedroom on a laptop, and overnight almost it could become a worldwide success. And because of that, kind of the introspective kind of singer-songwriter prophet model that used to kind of permeate the ethos of music that was made here in Nashville is really no longer a thing. And part of that is maybe the natural and inevitable evolution of the music business in general. But it's really sad to me because music is no longer, this is true in all formats of music, really. I know there are underground musicians and, there are people making music that is speaking truth, into our cultural moment. But for the most part, music as a art form has kind of abandoned in my view, it's abandoned that, kind of long held responsibility to be prophetic and to be kind of the 30,000 feet view of where we are, and kind of a mirror to the populace. And I feel like music as an art form in general has kind of abandoned that responsibility over the last, couple of decades. Will that art form recover, that responsibility? And more specifically, will, the format of music that I worked in for so many years, become that voice again? I'm not sure. I think that's to be seen. Though those prophetic voices in art still exist, and different, whether it's, as I know you just saw Hamilton, the musical, if they exist in other, forms of entertainment or art form, for consumption and contemplation. But music is not that anymore, in my view.
I take this as a sign of great sadness for me, Brad. Because my view is maybe a primitive one, but as country music became more mainstream, more sophisticated, blended more with pop culture, it lost much of its deep authenticity, and that part of it, which was a little bit on the unsophisticated side, where it really tried to examine the daily work life, transportation life, family life, food life, marital life, romantic life. That whole world of country music seemed to me to be beautifully American and deeply authentic. And what I hear now, although often very fine, is, I think, a dramatic loss.
I would agree. There again, Americana music and kind of folk and bluegrass music still retain some, at least the facade of some of those efforts, but kind of as a brand and a format and a widely distributed form of music, it's kind of become a thing of the past now.
Ain't no place for Minnie Pearl.
It's becoming a little bit of a dark conversation, you two. There are bright spots out there, and we could take time to point people to them, but unfortunately, we are out of time for this week. Brad, so good to speak with you, and I wish you the best, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and I know that you would wish that to all of our listeners.
Listen, I miss talking to you guys. I consider both of you dear friends and mentors, and I'm always still listening every week anxiously. And I do wish all of our listeners, all those who have different worldviews and different experiences, I wish everyone happiness, and everyone a perspective of gratefulness and thankfulness for what we have. And I know I'm happy and joyful. My children are home. We're warm and safe, and I couldn't be more grateful for family and friendships this season.
So, Brad, I'll think of you. This is being recorded on Thanksgiving week. I'll think of you on Thursday, and you probably all go out into the RV and spread yourselves around a little bit and have a meal. But this is my last question for today. Can there be a Thanksgiving dinner in the South that does not include the word grits?
I have never had Thanksgiving dinner with grits. I'm not sure what part of the South you experienced or have the view that that's a thing.
How about a waffle?
No grits.
How about a waffle?
No waffles. Where have you been, Clay?
Oh man, I've been in Jackson, Mississippi, my friend. And by the way, I saw Minnie Pearl at Ryman Auditorium in the last performance there when they closed for 20-some years. And there's no place in country music now for Minnie Pearl, but she was an extraordinary something.
Yeah, indeed.
So we're talking to Brad Crisler, one of our dearest friends. He came to visit us. He's the only known human being who has been to the undisclosed location of the New Enlightenment Radio Network barn.
Well, I thought we took Beau out there too, didn't we?
Well, you did, but I wasn't there, and I'm not even sure that happened. But I'll tell you this, that...
Oh, you weren't there. Okay.
I don't want to create any kind of causal relationship, but Brad soon went back to Nashville and became a gazillionaire.
Yes, indeed.
We'll see you soon. We'll talk to you in the new year.
You guys take care.
You too. Best to your family.
We'll see you all next week for another important edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
The Thomas Jefferson Hour is brought to you each week by Dakota Sky Education. The program is distributed nationally by Prairie Public. President Thomas Jefferson lived from 1743 to 1826, and this program presents his views. President Jefferson is portrayed by the award-winning humanities scholar and author Clay S. Jenkinson. To obtain a copy of this or any show for a $12 donation, please call 701-575-0727. This program is also available online at jeffersonhour.com and on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to correspond with President Jefferson or submit a question for him to answer on the program, please visit the website at jeffersonhour.com. The Thomas Jefferson Hour is produced at Makoche Recording Studios in Bismarck, North Dakota. Bach Cello Suite No. 3 in C Major by Stephen Swinford. Thank you for listening. Please tune in again next week for another thought-provoking, historically accurate program, Through the Eyes of Thomas Jefferson.